Welcome to the Excellence at Work podcast, where we explore the strategies and best practices that drive business success. I'm Rochelle Cook, COO of Brandon Hall Group and the host of our podcast, along with members of our executive team. In each episode, we'll dive into the latest trends, insights, and real-world examples from some of the most exciting leaders from organizations worldwide. Be part of our journey and learn from the best as we discuss innovative approaches and cutting-edge technologies for talent management, learning and development, leadership, diversity and inclusion, and more.
Hi, everyone. This is Michael Rochelle, Chief Strategy Officer, Principal Analyst here at the Brandon Hall Group. And this is another episode of Excellence at Work podcast. I'm lucky to have with me Peter Mulford today from BTS. And Peter, I'm going to have you introduce yourself.
Terrific. Hey, Michael. Peter Mulford from New York originally. I work out of our BTS offices in New York, but today I'm actually coming to you from Silicon Valley, where I'm doing some exciting work with one of the frontier labs. And why? I'm the Chief AI Officer and also the head of our artificial intelligence and innovation practice at BTS. So I travel to wherever clients have interest in artificial intelligence, and that, as it turns out, is just about everywhere these days, which is why I also feel like I'm single-handedly keeping United Airlines stock afloat with all the travel I'm doing. Lovely to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well. And for our audience, we want to talk about AI as it relates to where it is today. So maybe we can start there. Where do you see AI in HR today, just from your expert opinion?
Where do I see AI and HR today? Wow, that's what an opening question. There's a lot to unpack there. I think the first thing I would say is, since you frame it that way, HR is in, and talent professionals in general are in a really interesting position, whether they realize it or not. Because if you wonder what sits in between the capabilities of these models and the ROI that CEOs everywhere want to get from these models, it actually is at the level of people. And what I mean by that, instead of just some phrase, is, the easiest way to think about artificial intelligence is in layers. I think of a multi-layer cake. You've got the model layer itself, which is the domain of the Anthropics and the OpenAIs and the Microsofts of the world. They're building the models. And that's actually become, to some extent, commoditized, right? So you just have these machines that produce a lot of intelligence. Then the next layer above that is the application layer. And this is where some differentiation comes in. This largely has to do with how you interact with the models, whether you're using Claude from Anthropic, or you're using a Copilot or Azure Studio, how you interact with these models. And then the layer above that, though, most of the attention is really at the level of the models and the application, but not enough people are thinking about the execution layer, which is basically how people interact with these models, what they do or don't do when using these models. And it's surprising. I guess it's not that surprising, but so much of the attention is on the application layer and the model layer that I think people are genuinely missing the thing they should be focusing on, which is the execution layer. And of course, that's where HR and talent professionals, and quite frankly, leaders everywhere, have the highest leverage opportunity.
And when you think about AI and how it's rolling out in HR, do you think people are starting to see the value that they thought they would receive from it? What's the feedback that you're getting from people that you talk about? Are they seeing the immediate benefits? Are they planning for the long-term benefits? What are you hearing as the breakthroughs in using AI in HR right now?
Yeah, that's interesting. Are they seeing the benefit? Well, there's actually two questions you just asked in there, Michael. There's, are they seeing the benefits? And then the second question is, are they seeing the benefits they expected? And that really depends on the company. I know that's the consultant's answer to everything, right? It depends. But, for example, there's one client we're working with in the medical devices space where I would say the HR team is actually way out ahead of the rest of the company in terms of their use of AI. And I think it's so interesting because they're so humble and, wondering aloud how do we stay ahead of the curve? And I want to say to them, you are ahead of the curve. And then, of course, there are other companies where that's not true, not just at the level of HR, but I would say at the level of the organization generally. Probably what you just, in your question, what you did for me there, Michael, is some of it does have to do with expectations, right? You said, where are they relative to their expectations? I think for many companies, at least some of the problem is they don't have the right expectations. Like an analog I like to draw is think about reading books in the dark by candlelight, right? By analogy, I mean, for much of our lives, we've been reading books in the dark by candlelight, right? With technology. In this case, technology is the candle, and fire is an amazing thing, and we can see quite a lot with it. But what's happened now is now we have electricity, right? So now electricity, AI is now electricity. And what's funny is what are people doing with it? They're still reading books in the dark. So, they have a lamp light now, they have an electric light. But of course, electricity is good for a whole lot more than that, including, by analogy, exploring the fundamental physics of electrons. And yet a lot of us are still using this amazing technology to summarize emails or to synthesize documents or to, for personal productivity. And they're just missing what I would call huge frontier use cases. So that was a long answer, Michael, but I guess the answer is sometimes firms, really depending on the firm, they are, quite happy with what they're getting because their expectations are too low. And in other cases, the problem is the expectation. In other cases, you have some HR people who are way out ahead of the curve and they just don't realize it.
But kind of drilling down on it a little bit farther, Peter, do you see people setting up for AI KPIs like they do for other things, business objectives or numerical setups like cost reduction or time reduction? Do you see that type of ROI analysis, business case analysis being used yet for AI?
Yes, and not consistently, but what I would call the frontier firms, the firms that really get it, they're starting to do that. Partially because I think CFOs are getting grouchy. I don't know if you noticed this, but rolling into 2026, I think a lot of executives are impatient. They're kind of done with the experimentation phase and the adoption phase. Now they want to say, okay, well, show me some kind of results. So the firms that are out ahead have started doing this. The firms that are getting it right, however, there's a right and wrong way to do this, we're noticing. I call it like type 1 and type 2, just to keep it simple. Type 1, and this literally comes down to how these goals are set and the nature of top-down involvement, right? So the first type of top-down involvement and goal setting looks something like this. It's command and control. It's basically people saying who gets to experiment, what tools they use, exactly what approaches they should use. It's usually headed up by a head of something or a chief in the title. And what it does, it's well intended, but it tends to kill the kind of authorship, ownership, and innovation energy that gets you to real breakthroughs. And that tends not to work as well. And then there's a second type, which I would call criteria clarity. This is where you get leaders that define really clearly what the goals are. So they say these are the KPIs and why they matter. These are the solution areas we want you to focus on and why they matter. But then after that, they create the space for people to experiment and iterate and discover solutions for whatever these problems are. I'd say what they both have in common, Michael, is they do have KPIs attached to it. Otherwise, you end up spending a lot of energy reimagining workflows that get you almost no benefit or marginal benefit. So you do want to aim the collective creativity of your team at problems that matter. But then once you do that, there's a difference between kind of top-down command and control versus top-down criteria clarity. And it's that second group that's really doing remarkable stuff that we're seeing so far.
Do you see business professionals asking for business case ROI on AI? Are they there yet already? We, in our research and work that we do, we see organizations at the business level already beginning to ask, you've had AI for a while. What do you see are the perceived benefits around that? Are we going to see more? Have we topped out? Do you think it's Do you think organizations are at that stage in a high percentage, or do you think most people are still saying, give us a little bit more time to see what we're going to be able to drive with AI, and whether that's reduction in cost or reduction in time or improvements or risk mitigation? We need more time to figure that out.
Yeah, it's a mixed bag, right? And it varies. It doesn't even vary by industry so much. It really varies by company. And what I'm noticing is it really depends where they are on, broadly speaking, an AI maturity curve. So, no surprise, I'm sure, to any of your listeners, if you're at the first stage where it's literally driving adoption, right? You've just put AI systems in the hands of your people, and maybe you've sent them to a generic class on prompt engineering. At that stage of maturity, really the measure you want to track is adoption. And not for nothing, there are things to be discovered at the other side of adoption measures. You'll start to notice the really surprising ways that people react to and interact with AI, and quite frankly, the right and wrong way to drive adoption. And that's where a lot of companies are. But as soon as they get that down, as soon as they get past the so-called thousand flowers blooming phase, and you want to, you move past personal productivity, like, okay, hey, look, I just reimagined a workflow, good for me. That's where, as organizations reach higher up the impact ladder, that's typically where bigger KPIs come in. And since you're asking me, what are we seeing? We're seeing an almost perfect one-to-one relationship between the place firms are on the maturity curve and the level of ambition they're going after. And I suppose that really shouldn't be that surprising. But if you look at the arc of a transformation over time, that's really what you want to be thinking about. You want to figure out, okay, at what point have we gotten the adoption thing down and we can start aiming higher? And then when we do, are we providing criteria clarity, or are we swooping in with a kind of top-down involvement that just kills all of the energy?
And just kind of follow up to that too, a lot of folks are asking about what they should be doing internally to drive ROI, but there's still a lot of folks out there that are trying to figure out how they pick third-party providers still that are using AI. How does that differ in terms of figuring out the business case ROI when you're trying to evaluate, should I bring in this provider that uses AI? How is that different than figuring it out, like building it internally and figuring out the ROI from that perspective?
So it sounds like the question you're asking is, how do I, once I have a problem that I know is worth solving, how do I figure out if this is something that I could solve internally myself with, do-it-yourself models or capabilities, or if this is something for which I need to lean on external help? Is that the question you're asking?
Well, what I'm trying to get at is a lot of folks are still picking providers to use, and a lot of them now incorporate AI, and they're being asked for a business case ROI for moving towards an AI enabled provider versus the classic ROI of where organizations are building their AI stack internally and they're doing a different type of ROI analysis. How does someone say, we should not use the provider we have now and go with this provider because they have AI incorporated? How do you articulate, or how do you build the business case ROI for using this new provider that has AI in its platform and potentially be more expensive, and go through the whole transition of bringing that new provider in and implementing their product?
Yeah. Well, the good news is while AI itself is always changing, and it's, we're constantly being surprised by what the systems can do, the way you figure out which vendor to use or not is largely the same as it's ever been. I mean, if we go back to the layer cake I talked about before, right? You have models, you have application layers, and then you have the execution layer. I think at the top of that cake, you'd have the problem you're trying to solve, right? So now imagine that. And what you're doing is you're saying, okay, here's the problem I'm trying to solve, whatever it is. Then you're looking at the model that different vendors use to solve it. You're looking at the application layer, which is, the interface, the data governance, whatever kind of service they provide on top of the model. And then you're finally asking, all right, well, given those two things, will this reduce a pain point for my people or not? Or will this augment the capability of my people or not? And then it just comes down to compare all of the different vendors you have to choose from. That's it. So that more or less stays the same. I think the only thing that it's just like any other vendor you might have chosen to use any other thing you were planning on doing. The only thing I think that's perhaps a little bit different about AI in all of this is, one, there are certain things that AI is good for and that it's not. And you really ought to know how the technology works. Like, if I'm doing something with, SAP, for example, I don't really need to understand the mechanics of it, for CRM in order to make a decision. But AI is different. You want to know what it can and cannot do. That way, you have a kind of intellectual self-defense so that when a vendor comes in and promises you what their solution can do, you can ask questions, really thoughtful questions about, how was your model trained? And, how does this integrate with my existing data? And what kind of evals do you use? Those sorts of things. You really do want to know that. And that's maybe the thing that makes it different from other technology vendor choices you've had to make in the past. And I'd also say there really is a kind of, I don't want to say hysteria, but there's certainly a lot of energy out in the world around AI now, and a lot of promises being made that I'm not entirely sure are technically accurate, that you want to get out ahead of. And if you know how the models work, you'll immediately be able to sniff out the accurate descriptions of capability versus the things that are a little bit fabulous.
Kind of staying along those lines, Peter. So I choose a provider that has AI. And do you find right now that that's a more complicated, costly rollout? Do you think that AI actually makes it easier to roll out the platform itself? What have you seen so far? What have you heard about AI in and of itself being an easier implementation than the traditional platforms?
Yeah, well, this is. I love the question. This is going to be a little self-serving. So, to all of our listeners, self-serving alert. Let me just plant that flag out there so you can take what I say with an appropriate grain of salt. What we are seeing at BTS, but it's because we're looking through a very specific keyhole, and that's important to notice, is that you can quickly move people from skepticism to adoption to excitement quite fast, surprisingly fast, if you do it experientially. And the irony is, AI helps. AI is, and specifically generative AI, so Anthropic, the ChatGPT, that sort of thing. It helps you. It helps. AI helps you to use AI, is the basic answer here. And what I mean by this specifically is, in an engagement we just did with a large insurance company, the way a typical engagement would work is we give some people a good understanding of how the technology works, what it can and cannot do. Why do we do this? Because we want people to be impressed by what's possible, but not mystified by it. This is really important. If you go in and you get your hands on a keyboard and a prompting exercise and you think it's cool, but you don't understand what you saw, you can get one of two problems. You can either get champions who run out into the world and they say, hey, everybody, look what I've done, but potentially put the business at risk because they don't know what's actually happening under the hood. Or you get the other version, which is, oh, that's really cool, and now I'm freaked out. I don't like this at all. So in a typical engagement, getting back to your question, we'll start by making people understand what the technology can and cannot do, and then we get them to work immediately. Not in prompting exercises, but actually taking real business problems and using AI as a partner to solve them. And here's the thing, Michael, what's so interesting, the thing that surprised me the most is what happens to people's sense of identity when the technology actually works. It's, yeah, they have a moment where they can see, oh, that's pretty cool. I can get an ROI from this. But the thing you don't hear about is how their sense of identity actually starts to shift. So it's, imagine they're all working at a table and now they understand how AI works and they're working with it and they're actually rebuilding something from the ground up. And as they do that, it's just you see something shift in how they see themselves professionally. Suddenly they realize that, you know what, my previous expertise has just become more valuable, not less, because the leader realizes I'm the person who knows what AI output to trust, which one to interrogate. And that kind of judgment is rarer and harder to build than the AI models itself. So, and I'd say what excites me about working at BTS is we're starting to understand the conditions that produce that shift, and they're learnable and they're designable. They're not random. For example, it's not about personality type or Hogan scores or digital fluency scores. It's actually about creating the right kind of consequence rich practice environment in which people can work through these changes experientially and then arrive at that moment themselves. It's super, super cool to see.
And just kind of building on that, do you find that part of this ROI analysis, do you think that, and you can again, talk in the first person from a BTS standpoint, some concerns with the ROI are the folks that are going to be using the technology need to be upskilled and reskilled. They're not automatically going to be able to take advantage of AI. There's going to be a learning curve, or we may even potentially have to hire new talent to augment, the power of what we're bringing in from an AI standpoint. Generally speaking, what you've seen, have you seen most teams be able to learn along the way or learn incrementally or get a pretty good handle on being able to use the AI without having to go through a big upskilling, reskilling event?
So it sounds like you're asking, are people able to have the kind of moments I described where in a eureka moment where they go from worrying about, say, losing their job to realizing that my judgment and my skills are more valuable in the presence of AI than without it? And does it take a huge training effort to get there?
Right.
Is that the gist of your question? Well, I think I should have a button instead of a Staples button, the button where it says that was easy. I should have a consulting button that just says it depends, that I can just hit the consultant's button. It depends what you mean by huge. What I would say, here's what we know works. But again, take it with a grain of salt because we're looking through, the BTS keyhole. And for 40 years, what has BTS done? Everything we've done is experiential learning. So I would say through our keyhole, you don't need a 6-month multi-step intervention. I mean, in some cases, we've seen spectacular results. I mean, third-party verified results in a day, which I will say is quite remarkable. I mean, before AI, minimum 3 days to get to kind of any ROI for the work we do. So you can do it in a day. You just have to be clear that you start out with deep technical foundation. You can't skip that, which they don't like doing that because a lot of people don't even understand it. They just want to jump to the flashy stuff, just jump to the prompt engineering or the Claude coding or the vibe coding, whatever. You can't skip that. You've got to take the mystery and misery out of what's happening. And then the second thing is you really do need to make it hands-on. People need to discover for themselves what they're capable of in the presence of these systems. And it does need to be frontier cases. So by frontier cases, I mean pushing the models to the outer limits of what they can do. So, not AI to replace electricity to replace a candle, but electricity to discover the fundamental physics of electricity, for example. And then when you do that, when you take them out to the frontier, they can come back at the end of that experience much more jazzed and excited for doing practical things. But if you don't take them out to the frontier, the most you can hope for is immediately practical and low ROI activities. I would say BTS's entire design methodology is around taking them out to the frontier experientially rather than just lecturing at them. When you do that, though, I will say amazing things start to happen. And not because I say so, but because we've got the verified results that say so.
Last question for you, Peter, is in BTS's experience so far, what's the biggest ROI for a use case? Like, which use case have you seen has had the greatest ROI for you and your team in helping your clients?
So it sounds like you're asking what's the biggest ROI we've seen internally?
For your clients and the use cases and helping them?
Using AI.
So in helping your clients, what have you found are the use case that has the biggest ROI for them? What have you been able to
Oh, okay.
solve for
So
them?
yeah, yeah. Whew. I mean, there's quite a few. I like one of my favorite. I mean, I have to keep under NDA, of course, but one of my favorites is an FMCG company. After some workshops with BTS, discovered how to use AI to create what I would describe as synthetic customers, and then to use literally a whole focus group, if you will, of synthetic customers, and then use those synthetic customers to do rapid prototyping of new product launch ideas and new market launch ideas. And what was amazing about it is they were able to figure out fast and cheap things that were wrong with their initial approach that they couldn't see because they, as a human team, were kind of in a bubble. They've been working together forever. They've been working at the company for quite a long time. And what happened is not only were they able to come up with a reimagination of their core solution that started winning in the market and driving revenues, they were able to do it cheaply because their dependency on outside vendors, basically ad agencies, went down because the AI replaced it. Not only was it cheaper and faster, it was just better. So that's one of my favorite examples. I mean, I got dozens and dozens, but that's so. What would I call that as a category? I would call that as a category of high ROI, using it to quickly and cheaply test ideas that in the past were neither quick nor cheap to test.
I like that. I like that. Well, I know we're at time here. It was a pleasure spending the time with you. It's nice to have someone of your
Yeah,
credentials,
likewise.
background, and experience, Peter, that can really, talk about a highly technical area and a very difficult thing to measure and ROI, and just make it simpler and more straightforward for folks to understand. You gave some great examples. So I appreciate your time today. And any closing thoughts for our audience?
Any closing thoughts? Yes, it is an exciting time to be alive. Nerve-wracking for sure. I'm not gonna be a fabulist and say everything is great. It's also quite stressful for any one of a number of reasons. But I would say these are going to be amazing. These next few months, maybe years, but certainly months, are going to be exciting ones. And I would encourage everyone to lean into them, and more specifically, to keep learning faster than the rate of change. It's a fancy way of saying, I was just saying this to my 16-year-old, it's okay not to know the answer. In fact, it's probably better if you don't, because that means you're more susceptible to error correction. What isn't acceptable is, I think, to just give up, throw your hands up and say, I can't do anything, and stop learning. So if you keep
Right.
learning faster than the rate of change, it can be quite exciting.
I like that. Great place to end. And look forward to tapping you and your team later on in the year, because as we know, every day AI is changing and the story's changing
Yep,
along with it. So it'd be interesting to check back with you and see how things are progressing. But thanks again for your time today. Again, this is Michael
you're
Rochelle,
welcome.
Chief Strategy Officer, Brandon Hall Group, with Peter Mulford, who is BTS's Chief AI Officer. And thank you for your time today. Look forward to another episode. So that
Take
turned
it
out really
easy.
well.
Bye, everybody.
Yeah.